Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts, and this is a show that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. And so, guys, did you know that there's a type of therapy called horticultural therapy? Yes, today I'm talking about the power of gardening for your mental health. Well, horticultural therapy happens when you participate in activities that are related to gardening, and if you're being guided by a licensed horticultural therapist. The horticultural therapist works with you and sets up a specific treatment plan. And now, if you're not working with a specific licensed therapist, you can still gain therapeutic benefits from gardening. The difference is that a licensed horticultural therapist can team up with a landscape or garden designer to intentionally create a therapeutic garden. And that's very intentionally laid out. A therapeutic garden tends to create a sensory experience with colors and fragrances and specific types of plants. And with a horticultural therapist, a patient, or person who's using the therapist can have goals related to improving their mental abilities, their speech, their social skills, as well as problem solving. Now, if you're not working with a therapist, but you have a garden and you find it therapeutic to do gardening, then rather than doing horticultural therapy, you may be doing what's called therapeutic horticulture. So I'm going to pause and say, I know I sound like I just said the same thing twice, but I'm going to say it again. In the field, as they say, there is a difference between horticultural therapy and therapeutic horticulture. So, horticultural therapy is something that you do with a licensed horticultural therapist, whereas therapeutic horticulture is something that you can engage in passively, or you can do without a trained person. You can do it with or without a trained person, basically. So you can engage in therapeutic horticulture on your own if you're involved in planting and maintaining a garden and you find it to have positive effects on your mental health. Even going to a botanical garden and just taking it in, observing, relaxing, that is therapeutic horticulture. And if you participate in a community garden, then you may also have social benefits to your gardening hobby. So, guys, today's show is going to be pretty brief, probably a 15-minute show. And I just want to go over some of the mental health benefits of gardening. So, first of all, I think you might note that gardening involves physical activity. Exercise has been proven to improve mental health. Gardening allows you to be active in a very pleasant way without feeling like you're stuck in a gym or that you're training for something. You get to see tangible benefits at the end of each kind of gardening workout. And your garden doesn't just help with your mental health, it helps with other people who are observing your garden as well. So it's a kind of physical activity that makes you not even realize that you're working out. You are getting exercise, you're being physical, and it's just really pleasant. You're not competing with anybody, you're working towards a specific goal. The other thing that gardening helps with is social interaction. It very frequently leads to social interaction. So, for example, if you grow vegetables, you might share it with other people, and that leads to you kind of talking to them. If you're outside gardening, sometimes people are just walking by and they strike up a conversation. They tell you how beautiful your flowers look. They might ask you what the name of that flower is or where you got that particular plant. So it helps to lead to more social conversations. And going to gardening centers and flower shows also leads to the building of connections. So this is one of the kind of mental health benefits that I read repeatedly as I was kind of preparing for this topic. Then being outside. would be the other thing. Being outside is generally relaxing and it's helpful for mental health. Getting fresh air and sunlight, all that vitamin D is a mood booster. So think about how during the dark days of winter, people tend to get seasonal depression. Well, sunlight and fresh air, getting outside, connecting with nature is proven to be a mood booster. Um, then, if you grow food, right, if you grow vegetables, you are likely to increase your consumption of vegetables. Growing your own food gives you access to healthy food and tends to spark a desire to have a more healthy diet and a more healthy lifestyle overall. How many of you out there have walked by a seed packet for some kind of vegetable or fruit that maybe you'd never had before and you thought, oh, I'm going to grow it and I'm going to try it and taste it, see what it's like. Even having different varieties of the same foods that you might be used to in the grocery store, if you have a different variety of it, you never know, it might have a different kind of additional nutrients, additional micronutrients that you may not be aware of. And when you grow things like vegetables on your own at home, and you grow it organically, you get to control the soil conditions, you get to control the nutrients. You may end up having a tastier kind of product. Then being successful at nurturing a plant can bring feelings of competency and positivity. So, feeding a plant, watching it grow, it kind of fosters patience. It makes you kind of more capable of waiting. That delayed gratification helps to kind of build that. Um, and the nurturance that you provide to that plant also leads to a beautiful environment. And that helps with mood too. If you're surrounded by beauty, that can help to just be a mood booster to be surrounded by beautiful things. So you're nurturing this, watching it grow, being patient, particularly when you see that success, you actually see your plant survive and you build this beautiful environment for yourself. That can be a mood booster as well. So there's also some studies to show that being surrounded by plants and by nature, whether it's inside your house with house plants or it's outside with a garden or nature walk, it does reduce anxiety overall. So if you're looking for ways to reduce anxiety, nature is one of those ways. There's a lot of stories of folks who got into gardening who had been struggling with anxiety and depression, and they found gardening to be very, very therapeutic for them. Again, even without the use of a specific licensed, uh, horticultural therapist. The other thing I like to think of with gardening is that it's a low stake hobby. And by that, I mean, if something goes wrong, if your plant dies, you can replace it. You can try again. It's not really a big deal if something goes wrong. It's just the plant. So it's a low stake hobby. There's no shame in being unsuccessful with growing something. You can try again with something else. There's no kind of big repercussions. So it's very safe in that way. And I think that's one of the benefits of gardening. Then for some people, gardening is quite different from their regular employment. It's talking about hobbies. It's very different from the regular employment for some people. And so it gives them a welcome break from their other responsibilities. So depending on what they might do for what you might do for your day job, when you garden, you may be paying attention to different kinds of details. Now you care about the weather, whether you're getting enough rain or not. You're looking at soil conditions. What's the pH of the soil? Do you have enough compost? Is it organic? You're looking at soil conditions and you're paying attention to the growing season and looking forward to the growing season, particularly if you live in an area where you may have winter. And so you can't necessarily grow things outside all year round. You may be looking for pests and trying to figure out how to do organic pest control. There's just a lot of different things that you have to learn about and pay attention to when gardening is your hobby. And that just gives your mind a break from whatever your regular day job is. There's a lot of folks out there that even, over a period of time end up memorizing the names of many, many plant species. And they always say the true kind of plant people are folks that when you ask them the names of their plants, they're not giving you the common names. They're giving you the like scientific names for the plants. And that just day job from your typical responsibilities, from the things you normally have to think about. Now, I wanted to just mention specifically for the Black community, in the Black community, there's sometimes this very false perception that there's less gardening going on. And I think what happens is that there's not very much representation in certain garden spaces. A lot of times, if you go to garden like flower shows or you go to botanical gardens and various places, you sometimes don't see a lot of representation from Black Americans. And so it gives you this impression that maybe they don't do as much gardening as other people. And I think that's not necessarily true. And remember, historically, right, that African slaves brought horticultural knowledge with them. And this was part of their value in coming to the United States and to coming to many other countries where slavery existed. And it was a part of their value, whether or not they received any credit for that. That was one of the things they brought with them was their horticultural expertise. Um, but I think what kind of happened is, of course, in the story of the United States, is there was some unevenness with where people could be free and not free, and there was some movement to urban areas where there was jobs and opportunities and freedom. And then, of course, there was years of systemic racism and redlining and these sorts of things. And so what ended up happening was that a lot of poor urban neighborhoods became associated with Black Americans. And there's this sense of like urbanization. And so Black Americans never really got associated with things like gardening, even though that's in our blood, it's in our history. And so this idea that Black Americans would garden for leisure was just not something that was a topic of discussion, given the racial oppression and these sorts of things. But again, it's always been happening. It's always been there. Now with social media, we've been able to see, we've been able to have more kind of visibility there are a lot of different accounts for Black gardeners. And if you haven't tried gardening yet, guys, what are you waiting for? Gardening is for everybody. It's not racially bound. There's not some racial groups that do it and not other racial groups. I think pretty much everybody, gets involved in gardening. And for most cultures you can think of, there's some kind of history of horticulture. So if you are interested in starting with gardening, my advice is, well, you could start with a house plant. I think a lot of people start with a house plant because, not everybody has an outdoor space. And so usually the advice is to start with a house plant. But if you live in a warmer zone and you have a longer growing season and some outdoor space, you could start with an outdoor container plant. And, no matter how you want to start, there's a YouTube tutorial for everything. Everything, any plant you have questions about, any planting method you have questions about, there's a YouTube tutorial for anything. So I would encourage those of us in the Black community who have not tried gardening yet, you should do it. Now, some have also said that it's been particularly empowering for Black Americans to grow their own food. So if your gardening is about food production, growing vegetables, that has been empowering for some people, especially during the pandemic where there was some concern about what would happen during lockdowns. And growing food, of course, can be individual or it can be a part of a community garden. I think a community garden is a great way for a neighborhood to increase in green spaces, but also for you to just socialize as a community and share in healthy bites for everyone. Gardening is a relatively inexpensive enterprise, especially if you pool your resources, like in a community garden. There was an article published in 2020 from Singapore that showed that for some people, community gardening may be even more helpful for mental health than individual gardening. So that's what that study showed, that for some people, they found community gardening to be more helpful than individual gardening for their own mental health, and possibly for the reasons I mentioned before, which is their socialization and sharing and some of these other things. People reported a greater feeling of well-being and resilience. And there is some evidence that community gardens can reduce food insecurity in some neighborhoods. There's also a lot written about gardening for seniors and how that can be helpful for a lot of the reasons I mentioned before. One is, of course, physical activity. Sometimes folks that are older can have reduced mobility or kind of other issues, and sometimes engaging in low key gardening tasks helps them to stay physically active, but in a way that is manageable for them, rather than just sitting around and doing nothing. Getting up, planting things, watering things, this can help with physical activity. And so with gardening, they're getting regular exercise without even trying. And also, again, gardening can protect against things like depression. It can protect against loneliness, and it can reduce anxiety. So it's helpful for the seniors as well. Um, Gardening reduces stress and it increases self-esteem, especially if you find that you're successful at it. And the studies show that gardening helps people to feel more satisfied with their lives and that it can improve brain functioning. So even if you think you don't have a green thumb or green fingers, try gardening even just for the improved life satisfaction and improved brain functioning. Okay. And don't be discouraged if you feel like you've killed many plants. Just keep going, keep trying, keep replacing them. It doesn't matter if they die, keep replacing them and be, surrounded by plants. So then what about children? What about children? There are many benefits to introducing children to gardening. Gardening helps to teach children planning and organization skills because, of course, you have to teach them the whole idea of like how it works, how you plant this seed or you have this seedling. So they have to learn how to plan and organize where to put things, what's going to happen next. So this is especially the case, as I mentioned, with seed sowing. And it teaches them patience because you can't make a plant grow faster than it wants to grow. And so they have to wait. They have to kind of learn that delayed gratification, which is really important for children to learn. And they may also have to work cooperatively with other people, particularly if it's a shared gardening project with, like at school or in the community. And then the thing that parents are always thinking is, how do I get my child to have fruits and veggies, to eat healthy foods? Well, children are more likely to eat fruits and veggies if they grow them. They're more likely to, not always, but they're more likely to if they grow them. And many children get a feeling of mastery from watching their plants grow and produce flowers or produce food. So it's just a healthy activity for them. It can help children with their interpersonal skills, which can be helpful for children with behavioral problems. There's been studies about the effect of gardening for children with behavioral problems, and how it, again, all of these qualities where it helps you with slowing down, being patient, problem solving, planning, organizing, being cooperative and social, those are all very valuable for children who have behavioral problems. Um, and just like for mental health in adults, it reduces stress in children, it reduces depression and anxiety, and it gives children exercise and it connects them with nature. So, again, it's exercise in a way that's fun. It's not necessarily super deliberate, but they're very active and it's doing something that they would enjoy. For small children, it can help to develop their fine motor skills because they have to pick up little things, little seeds, or kind of hold things in a certain way, and it helps them to develop their fine motor skills. And overall, kind of going back to the idea of the therapeutic garden, gardening can activate all of the senses. All five senses are activated with gardening. That's helpful for child development, where you have your developing neurological system. It helps to activate all the five senses. So it's therapeutic, but it's also helps with child development. So there's so many benefits to gardening. Okay. All right. One of the last things I'll say is gardening can foster a sense of responsibility. And that's one of the things that I've seen when I've worked with kids that have started doing gardening, is that it helps them to feel responsible for something. You know, for children, there's not much in the world that they're responsible for outside of themselves and their own behavior. And so it's helpful to give children and teens their own little project, their own little plant that they can take care of, their own little spot in the garden that they can grow things. It gives them something to be responsible for, and that they can feel a sense of competency and mastery over. And again, it's a low stake activity. So if you put them in charge of it and they forget to water it or they're not taking care of it, it's just a plant. It's not a big deal, right? It is important when working with kids to make the gardening tasks very simple. You know, don't don't assign them something that's very finicky or might die very easily. Give them something very simple, and let them grow something interesting to kind of get them kind of motivated. So something interesting like sunflowers that they will get a nice reward from when they see that really big sunflower, or something like tomatoes, which they can see it growing and then they can see it turning red and then they get to eat it. It's very interesting in that way. You can also consider plants that may be fragrant to kind of get that sense of your kind of olfactory or your sense of smell. So something like lavender, where every time you walk past it or brush it, it has a fragrance. Um, or you could consider something that has an interesting texture, like a succulent. So that kind of activates that sense of touch. So succulents could be a good one, and they're very hardy as well. You can also, if you're doing kind of a bigger gardening project, consider a theme like a butterfly garden where you would choose plants that attract butterflies, or a pollinator garden where you have a lot of kind of like wildflowers that would attract bees and other pollinators, which might be just more interesting for kids. And remember to try to keep the space safe and watch for things like gardening tools that, kids could accidentally hurt themselves with. Avoid pesticide sprays. So try to keep the space as safe as possible. So that's it for my show today. It's just a quick show on gardening as therapy. I think I've mentioned on the show before that I like to garden, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming growing season here in Massachusetts. Do you garden? Let me know if you garden. Drop a comment below. What do you see as the benefits of gardening for you? I'd be interested to hear what you think the benefits of gardening are for you. And I will check in with you again next week for Black Mental Health Matters with Dr. Kerry-Ann, podcast to be uploaded every Friday. So take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.